growing up on the south side of Chicago, going to a public school, right, for elementary, and everybody looked like me, it was definitely a shock. I was called the N word for the first time at night walking by myself. So that was not a pleasant experience because I was just like, oh my gosh, what may happen to me?
Welcome to Breaking Barriers of Black Investors, where we explore the inspiring stories of successful Black investment professionals and share the strategies for breaking down barriers in the asset management industry. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Good morning, Yolanda. How are you?
Good morning. I'm finding yourself.
I'm doing great. I would like to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time. I know today is Saturday, very early for me. It's 10 a.m. But I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us in the podcast to share your story. I know that it's been a busy week for you. I think I reached out. In fact, it's funny because I was looking through my LinkedIn and I wanted to see how did you and I connect. I reached out to you maybe about a year and a half ago. And and that was the time when I was actually studying for my CFA, and I saw your story and I saw your professional story. I was like, man, I really want to get to know how she got to where she is right now because you had all these executive roles, and I'm sure that there's many of them that you probably didn't put. So I wanted to make the decision that reach out to you for you to highlight your story. Today is a special day for me because I got a chance to put you in the podcast. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I will start by apologizing for that year and a half ago that it took us this long to get together. You mentioned studying for your CFA, so I know how daunting of a task that is. I have intentionally avoided that for years. So, yeah, kudos to you for that. And again, sorry we didn't connect, but so happy to be here with you today on this Saturday morning. Not too early for me, as you probably don't know, I've been going at it for hours already. So happy to be here.
Wow. What time did you actually got up today?
5 a.m. this morning. Yes, to get my sons off to South Carolina for a basketball tournament.
I'm curious. Like you drove there and came back?
No, my better half drove them. They are probably arriving in about 20 minutes. They typically fly to these tournaments, but 4 hours, they said, we'll just drive.
It's funny because when I was younger, I used to play basketball, and then let's just say that God had another plan for me. He said, "Hey, you know what? You're not gonna get this tall." So I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I
No, that's funny because my boys, I'm not happy about it, but they have tick marks all over the wall because they're constantly measuring themselves. And one is 11 and one is 9. And so the 9-year-old is determined to be taller than his brother was at that age. So I hear you.
I really want to start from the very beginning. I think that even when I was doing the research to prepare for this podcast, I like to call you a very mysterious woman, right?
I am not.
Only because of the fact that I could see your professional background, I could see your development. I was trying to figure out, okay, who you really are. So I want to start from the very beginning with you. Who are you and where are you from?
Sure. So as you said my name at the beginning of the show, I am Yolanda Wagner Foreman, and I stick that Wagner in there because when I started my career, I wasn't married. So it's funny, people that I see all the time, they still refer to me as Wagner. People just call me by my last name. But Yolanda Wagner Foreman, and I hail from Chicago South Side. Very, very proud of that. My entire family, my father, sisters are still in Chicago in the South Shore neighborhood. I was just there with them last week visiting. So, yeah, a product of the South Side. I like to say now, quite famously, that I graduated from Whitney Young High School, and that got on the map because Michelle Obama graduated from there. So, when I was in grammar school, and I went to Chicago public schools throughout my K through 12th grade, I went to a school and I was 8th grade valedictorian. And kind of at that school, it was an automatic click if you're valedictorian to be considered for Whitney Young. So that and the test scores sent me to Whitney Young, which is on Chicago's west side, and had a wonderful 4 years there. and then went on to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And that is really where my thirst or hunger for finance kicked in. I always tell people a funny story is that I knew that I wanted to be in finance, and people say, "How do you know that?" In high school, I was always good at math. I always knew that I wanted to be a business person. In high school, I actually had a job senior year at the Chicago Urban League. So I left school 2 to 3 hours before anybody else because I had a job at the Urban League. And that was like, oh, this is great. These are offices, it's this corporate environment. And I was actually helping people. So that just propelled me to want to have this life in business, not really knowing what, but in business. And so when I got to University of Illinois, freshman year, which many people don't do, I declared a major as finance and joined the finance club. And little did I know, I mean, University of Illinois is a predominantly white institution. I guess now it has a name, PWI. And I was the only, not only was I the only person of color in the room, but I was the only female in the room. And I didn't realize how that would kind of set the stage for what I was about to embark on post graduation. But it was all of these white guys, and they were all talking about the stock market and all these things that they were going to do and had been exposed to. And I had not been exposed to that. And I just said, if they can do it, I know I can do it. And it just propelled from there, the finance club, and then learning anything that I could on my own about the markets. And before I left U of I and I completed my degree in 4 years, I was hired by a firm that I think I can say because they're no longer around, Odie Stockbrokers. And that was a heck of an experience, but it really just got me to where I am today. It was the toughest job I ever had. The guys there were just tough as nails and not pleasant, but it really, sharpened my tools. I got my Series 7 and got out of there after selling some bonds to some people. That was, I didn't realize that being a stockbroker in the beginning meant I was cold calling people all day long.
You touch on a lot of things, and I want to break them down into some pieces because I think that even from the very beginning, coming from Southside Chicago, that's a to have the opportunity to get to where you are now. That's a major achievement. The only person I know that's from Chicago is you mentioned her. It's Michelle Obama, who has not only shined the light upon that area, but has really make a huge change for herself. So I don't know if you and her ever cross paths.
We have not, and it's just so interesting because my sisters are older than me, and
Hmm.
they are in her generation, and they actually went to the same grammar school as
Wow.
Michelle Obama. So to hear these stories and to now see the mural on the wall of the school that my sisters went to grammar school was amazing. It's interesting that I have not. My brother-in-law has had the opportunity to know former President Obama, and I, share the same dry cleaner in Hyde Park, which is in Chicago, with the Obamas, right? He was a state senator. So was always in rooms, right? But haven't had the pleasure to meet them. I'm sure it'll happen someday.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. But also, Chicago with the goods, but it also comes with the bad as well, right? South Side is really known to be one of the tougher area of the state, right? But even the city, particularly. You being a young black woman at that time, I want to ask you, like, how was it like growing up there at that time, being young, black in Chicago, and then how were you able to? And what were some of the challenges that you faced growing up?
Yeah, so I'd say, sometimes you can be really insulated from that. And I won't say that I was, but I had, we had neighborhoods. And my parents got a house in the South Shore neighborhood, which is very close to the lake, well sought after now. My mother has passed on, but my dad and I own the house jointly. And I probably get an offer on that house every week, right? Because it's a good, people want to move to that neighborhood, right? Growing up, we lived on 81st, and the neighborhood 79th Street was a street that had a lot of things going on. I mean, there were gangs, there were all of those things around us. I unfortunately lost some good friends to violence, and a tragedy. But it was a neighborhood. So our block, everybody knew each other. Everybody took care of each other. We could stay outside as long as the street lights were on. We knew when they came on, we were kind of supposed to go in the house, but the grandmother on the corner was watching us. My mother was watching out for kids. We all played and had a good time, and somebody was always looking out for you. So, there may have been a guy or two that was up to no good, but everybody knew it. And, we just took care of each other. So that sense of community was there. I am the youngest of four children. I had an older brother that, got caught up and was a part of the streets. Thank goodness he's still around today. I love my brother dearly. I say that to say I was kind of watched over because people knew whose sister, I was the sister of. But it was that sense of community, I tell you. And so everybody could watch out for everybody's child. It wasn't that, Miss Harris was going to say, oh, no, don't tell Yolanda what to do because her mother is. No, everybody was your mother. Everybody was your grand. So that made it easier for us. And, I can remember on the corner, Mrs. Palmer, she was an educator, right? So we always had people pouring into us. I will say that I was the first in my family to go and graduate from college. But
Wow.
what I love so much about my mother is that she always allowed other people to pour into me. So my third grade teacher who taught me a lot, my mother was fine, like, hey, go ahead and educate her and help her to get to where she needs to go. So that was a beautiful thing. It wasn't as bad as it could have been had we not had that wonderful sense of community.
It's funny because when you in the environment, a lot of time you don't realize how bad it truly is, or because you're so numb to what's going on, or because the fact that you think that's how the world is. Because even for myself, I didn't necessarily grow in a great neighborhood. It was pretty bad, but I was like, oh, okay, I know this, I know this person, I know that, and we'll go across the street, play at the park, play some basketball. But the sense of community, that was very important because everybody knew each other.
Absolutely.
Everybody,
Absolutely. And bad things happen. I mean,
of
you
course.
saying that just made me think about, I mean, I was robbed at gunpoint in front of my house.
Wow.
Things like that happen. And, I don't know. I knew I was going to still be here, but don't take me back to that moment. I was a senior in high school. So things happen, but I like to say things can happen any and everywhere. But yeah, I did grow up in those times.
And for you to actually get out, that's a huge steps. And
Mhm.
you made a decision, and you mentioned that you were top of your school for eighth grade,
Eighth grade,
and then I'm sure that you did well in high school.
I did.
Um,
Not
and
top of my class.
but you know what though, you got out. You went to the University of Illinois, which is huge, and I'm sure that it was a cultural shock for you,
Oh
right?
gosh. Yeah.
And just being the first day you enter the campus and you're looking around you and you're trying to find some similarities, you just, I don't know, it's hard to locate.
Yeah.
So I really want to talk about your educational experience for a minute, because I know that you mentioned it earlier. You got your bachelor in finance from Illinois, and then I know later on you went ahead and got an MBA from
Mhm.
Missouri, and then you had a turning point with me to me the last couple of years. You decided to get a master in public health. But before I get to that turning point, you know, talk to me about your experience, your actual experience. I know you mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but I really want to know like your bachelor experience and how were you like as a student?
So I only went 2 hours away. And that was because I really enjoyed being close to my mother, and she didn't want me far away because I was accepted to Florida A&M University and several schools, and I just knew I would go to FAM or to go to Spelman, but I had to do some thinking, some math, and I said, "Oh, that's a flight away." Right? My mother and I, very close relationship. And I said, that's probably not going to work out. So I needed to go somewhere where I could drive. I'm very strategic. And so,
Hmm.
because I was home every other weekend and I still graduated in 4 years, but it was a culture shock because Whitney Young High School is very different today than it was when I graduated in the late 90s. And I say that it was in the late 90s, it was predominantly Black. So going to U of I with 30,000 plus students, and we used to know the numbers. I think out of the 30,000 plus students, there were 1,000 Black people or less, give or take. And what was helpful to me was that Whitney Young sent a lot of people to U of I. I think we had definitely more than 100 people from my graduating class of 500 to go to U of I. So that was helpful. But being a business major, declared freshman year, it was that was when I got, I learned my lessons of you're going to be one of. And growing up on the south side of Chicago, going to a public school, right, for elementary, and all everybody looked like me, it was definitely a shock. I was called the N word for the first time at night walking by myself. So that was not a pleasant experience because I was just like, oh my gosh, what may happen to me? So you go to the violence in Chicago to the racism down in Urbana Champaign. So that was interesting, but I know that I'm motivated by these obstacles. And so it's like, okay, my roommate went to Whitney Young as well, and she's a math computer science major, so another tough major. But we had decided we were getting out in 4 years and we would stick together, although we never had a class that overlapped, but we were each other's support system. We weren't talking about mental health then, but clearly we were each other's support system because we definitely probably needed a lot of therapy to get through those 4 years, but it worked out. And I will say that the Black students there's a Black student union still going strong today that was there to support students that look like us. That was helpful.
It's crazy because many of us, like for myself, I'm still in my early 30s, just turned 30. When
My
you,
baby.
nah, you fine. I get that a lot, right? But you know what though? It's hard for us to really quantify how it was in the school system back then,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you hear stories and you watch videos, but to actually experience it, going to the classroom and just not feeling at home or not feeling in place, not feeling like you want it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even on top of that, right, you have to go to school, you have to focus, you have home that you have to worry about, but also getting ridiculed from time to time. It's That's tough, especially for a young Black woman, because I
Yeah.
think that for the male side, guys, we tend to put like this shield over us as if like, oh, we could walk through everything, and then we tend to act like nothing could phase us, but in actuality
Mm-hmm.
it does.
Yeah.
But for a young Black woman, it wasn't easy for you because not only are you Black, but you're a woman, which is extra layer of difficulty, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm assuming that there was this high level of competition at university, but I'm curious to know, what were your plan after university? I know you told me you work at a stockbroker, but
Mm-hmm.
was that your initial plan?
So it goes back to I knew that I wanted to be something in business. I had those seeds of being an entrepreneur many years back. I mean, I had a babysitting service at the age of 12. I like to joke, I had a full time summer job when I was 12, working at a home daycare center. And I was making $65 a week. So at age 12, you couldn't tell me anything. Um, and the woman that I worked for is not until I start to talk about this stuff do I realize how it goes all together. So the woman that I worked for who cared for my nephew, which is how I got the job, it was an in-home daycare. Those are entrepreneurs. There are organizations that actually sponsor these home daycare businesses. So, and I worked for her full time over the summer. So that kind of sparked in me, oh, hey, I can have my own business. She was in the comfort of her own home, very organized, providing a lot of structure for the children. And so once I get to U of I, and again, freshman year, go to that finance club meeting, it was a lot of talk about being a stockbroker. I laugh now when I say that because nobody is no longer a stockbroker. You're a financial advisor, but I will go ahead and date myself. I was a stockbroker. So that was the first job that I had out of college. When I went to that meeting, I said, I can do this. And I literally got the job with OD Stockbrokers. Stockbrokers was in the name of the firm. They were based out of Griswold, Michigan. But I got that job at the beginning of my senior year in college. And so I didn't start it until later, but we were doing some prep things while I was still in school. And I will just say that, Career Service Center, at least at University of Illinois, was phenomenal then. And I say that because I have a few mentees, but I have so many young people come to me for help. And I'm just amazed at how so many of the school's career services departments and centers are not what I was used to then. And even my own career service center at Georgia State,
Mhm.
some 20 years after I got my first degree, I said, wow, things have changed. And so it prompts me to want to help and do more for the younger generation, which I do, which we can talk about later. But it was phenomenal at U of I because, again, not many of us left college without having a job.
You mentioned it briefly. You said that the question I was going to ask you following from that is, did you go get your MBA a couple years later? But you said 20 years later. Or
Well, not sorry, 20 years later is this MPH.
oh,
No,
okay, okay, okay. So
no,
so
sorry. I am a, as my children like to say, Mommy, when are you going to be done with school? They're like, are you still working on the degree from when you were? No, this is a whole nother degree. But no, I went to grad school right at the turn of 2000.
when you finish, all this the school and you went and you was a stockbroker and you like, oh, that's not what I really expected. I'm sure that the toughness was extra in terms of how hard people were on you. And you mentioned that earlier that some of the guys there, they were very, because I watched Wolf of Wall Street, right?
Hmm.
And before I actually graduated with my bachelor, and I thought to myself, I said, man, if this is how it is, then it's going to be really tough. After graduating college, I went and started working with a huge firm, and I started to hear some of those languages. I was like, oh my God, it was a little bit harsh. But then again, looking back, I was like, okay, if I had that level of experience, I could only imagine the experience that you had to go through.
I will paint a real quick, short picture for you. When I started working there, because it was what I expected, minus all the cold calling. But the day that I arrived at the company, it was a smaller office that I was in. I think there were 15 of us. I did not realize that I was beginning work off the heels of a woman who had just filed a sexual harassment claim.
Wow.
So let's just say they didn't want any woman to be coming to work there, let alone a black woman. And the guy over me was didn't look like me, was foreign, and presented himself very nice. But literally the first day I started work, they were upset that they now needed to put toilet paper in the bathroom because another woman was coming to work there.
Wow.
And so I did what I had to do. We were all in my class, or cohorts as they call them.
Mhm.
There were 50 of us hired. We were spread amongst all the branches of the company, but it was just myself and one other gentleman that was new with me, a new trainee. And so our goal was to pass our Series 7, which was a daunting exam, but we were able to study for it for 1 or 2 hours at work. So I spent about 10 to 12 hours in the office, cold calling women at home, trying to sell them municipal bonds. That was my job. But I will say that I got very good at, I didn't take it personal. I had a lot of no's. I was able to sell a lot of bonds and even convert some of my former teachers into clients, right? Transfer their 403B money and let me help them to invest. And once I got the 7, I could then sell stock. So I stuck it out for the better of a year and then said I had to get out of there because the treatment, right? The fact that I was a woman and the fact that I was a black woman did not make it easy.
I can imagine. And most of us, after going through that experience, we would have just said, okay, you know what, that's it. I'm done. I'm done with this industry. I'm going to find something that's a little bit more friendly. But you stuck with it. In fact, you probably went even deeper.
Well, yeah, I think it was, I'm a strong believer. I know I have a plan, but God has a plan. And so it's a lot of times where he takes me. So when I left, I'll never forget, I resigned in the middle of the night. I had the keys to the office, left my letter because things had gotten crazy. They tried to get me back. They were very scared that I was going to file a suit. And I was never sexually harassed, so I'm not that person. I'm not going to create a situation, but it just wasn't a good cultural fit for me. It wasn't a pleasant working environment, being screamed at and yelled at. Who does that? I learned later that that's how some people operate. Never. I always treat people the way I want to be treated. So I did. I said, what should I do? And I said, I'll go somewhere. I'll do some volunteer work, if you will, to figure it out.
Mhm.
And I had the fortune of knowing it's about relationships. And so I called on somebody that I knew, and I'm so sorry he's not no longer with us. Emmett T. Vaughn. He was high up at, I don't know if he was at Exelon at the time, but an energy company in Illinois. And he was on the board of a nonprofit, Lutheran Family Mission. And I joined them to volunteer because I learned from one of my sisters that you can go and volunteer, and if the person likes the work that you're doing, or you may find an opportunity there. And so I just kind of did some work and helped them out. And within 2 or 3 weeks, I was director of human resources because, and here's the ironic part, the organization helped mothers, helped women to become entrepreneurs and have what? In-home daycares. And that's the 360 all the way back to my 12-year-old job. I am now the director of human resources for an organization that helps Black women on Chicago's West Side become entrepreneurs. And that's when I say sometimes you just have to think about this. Even as I was getting prepared to speak to you, it's like, wow, I didn't even realize how so many things in my life have just tied together. So I was there doing good work, social service, and I sat there one day and decided I needed to go back to school. And so in that stint of director of human resources, after doing that for 2 years, I was applying and they didn't want me to go, but I decided I would go and get my MBA because I was always told at U of I it was better to have some work experience before going back to school. And so it's like, okay, stockbroker, director of human resources. Let me go get this MBA.
Real quick, we hope you're enjoying the episode and your support would mean the world to us. If you find value in breaking barriers of Black investors, we kindly ask you to take a moment to rate and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also encourage others to join our empowering community. Thank you. My last guest, he joked. He said that one of his biggest mistake was immediately after graduating with his bachelor, he went ahead and got his MBA. He said that he didn't really felt that he utilized that time wisely because he didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
experience, right?
Exactly.
So, but for you to make the decision to go ahead and volunteer, because a lot of us, and this goes to my audience that are in college, that you don't necessarily have to apply for a job to get paid. You don't necessarily even have to apply for internship. You could just find an organization that you genuinely value, which your value align, and then hopefully somebody there will be able to see you, right? So
Absolutely.
many of us do not even know how to properly approach that, right? Or we don't even think about that. But for you, that worked very well for you. So that was awesome. I know that you told me that you went back and got your MBA, and then I know you had a couple entrepreneurship journey, but also you really scaled up within the hierarchy of the corporate structure, right? Where you started from the bottom and now you at the top, right? So what I want to know is that first let's talk about the entrepreneurial journey. When did you decided that, hey, I wanted to go ahead and start something of for myself?
Okay, but in order to start there, I just have to take you back because I think to me my experience is a little unique or different than others because if one of the things that happened to me was I've had the pleasure of working for wonderful entrepreneurs. And so when I was in grad school, right before I went to grad school, I had that director of human resources job, and I'm serving as volunteer. Before that, one of the things that I did was I was seeking employment before I got the employment. And one of the interviews that I had was with an asset management firm. And the asset management firm happened to be the Kenwood Group, which was based in Chicago. And the founder was the first African American, the first Black woman to start her own mutual fund, Barbara Bowles. And so I did not get that job, and that was before I went to graduate school. So I didn't get that job, but I had an interview, remember it well. And then I graduate from in Missouri. I graduate, get my MBA, and my parents. So I'm living in Missouri. My parents are in Chicago. They tell me that I have a piece of mail. Okay, open it. So open the mail, and it's saying, "Hey, you may remember us from a couple years ago. We've got this position open and we really liked you, but it just wasn't, a good fit at the time for that position. Would you consider us?" They did not know they did not know I'd gotten an MBA, any of these things. And so I love that because again, the impression that I made, or that relationship, if you will, at the beginning, I was like, wow, people really do hold on to a resume, or if they met with a candidate, because I had actually gone in for an interview.
Hmm.
And literally, I was so happy about that because I was an Edward Jones scholarship recipient at the University of Missouri, where I was getting my MBA, and I had gone through this rotation program. I covered fixed income, large cap stocks, small cap stocks. They take you through this rotation. And they thought I was going to be great at investment banking. I kind of landed there, but here I am at this really big firm, and I'm the Black woman that knows what she's talking about, if you will.
Hmm.
So they had decided to make me an offer after having paid for school. They decided to make me an offer. And I said, I am not staying in St. Louis, Missouri. And I did not want to, having that rotation and internship there, I knew that that wasn't the fit for me.
Hmm.
And I'm glad that I figured that out. And then I had this letter from the Kenwood Group, and I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. And so that brought me back to Chicago. And I like to say, if you will, the rest is history. So the whole stock brokerage piece and having worked at Edward Jones had me in the industry,
Hmm.
if you will. But coming to Kenwood put me in the institutional space, on the institutional side of the business. And you can only imagine how happy one can be working in a shop where people look like me. Barbara was one of the first to get her CFA many years ago. And, I just work with some wonderful people who I still talk to on a very regular basis. And actually, a couple of them came along with me when I did start my own small cap value firm. So that was just the beginning of a lot of wonderful times for me in the asset management industry.
And I think that was a pinnacle moment for you, right? Where coming from a a firm where it was some sort of uncomfortable in a sense of not that many people around were. For me, I like to think that in a firm, it's good to have a great representation of yourself,
Mhm.
right? Someone that looks like you, someone who's actually doing something for themselves and who has that knows the roadmap, right?
Right.
Um, and now, the goodwill that you had put in place many years ago came back 10 times full. So when you got there, I'm sure that Barbara helped you along the way. Before we do get into the entrepreneurship journey, you was like a chief administrative officer, and then the co-CEO, and then founder CEO. So you have all these executive positions. I want to know, how do one position themselves to get into an executive suite?
So again, having a different trajectory than many is I was quite quite strategic about not working at a large shop. I mean, there are many things, thank goodness, how they tell you don't put everything you've ever done on your resume, but outside of asset management, I worked at large firms. I worked at General Motors Asset Corporation, a huge firm. I was playing off of some HR while I was in grad school. Then you get to Edward Jones, huge firm. And so what I knew then, Edward Jones offered me investment banking, is that they'll put you in a lane, And pretty much that's where you end up staying. And so Kenwood afforded me the opportunity to come in as a vice president of marketing and client services. And I can remember being at expos, Black Women's Expo in Chicago. I was really selling a mutual fund. And so when you hone those type of skills, right? I mean, because I like to tell people that we're all in some form of sales,
Hmm.
whether you know it, accept it or not, we are. But I was at a smaller shop, and so it's pretty easy, if you will, to I sat in on the investment team meetings. I was in the room with the team all around the Bloomberg.
Hmm.
My boss at the time was able to take me to meetings with her to do X, Y, and Z. So I got to see how different things operated. I got to sit down with the director of research to see how, everybody was analyzing stocks and making all these different decisions.
Wow.
Whereas if I'm at a larger shop, I am going to be doing a whatever that A is, investment banking. And so it afforded me the opportunity, purposely working at boutique shops, that I would get to have these experiences and also to get further up the ladder. Maybe sooner. I don't want to say sooner. I laugh now. I've been in the business over 20 years, but I've enjoyed every moment of it and not being afraid to do things that some others won't. I mean, if I needed to clean my own office, that's what you do. I was just so eager to learn all of the business, and it served me well because I knew how to do every component of the business by the time I started a business. And so that was just wonderful for me.
That is awesome. And then you decided to start your own small cap value fund. Is that what you?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
first of all, I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, starting any fund is hard. Just thinking about it is hard.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
but then again, you made that leap, right? And you mentioned that by that time you understood the component of how to run and the
Mhm.
business. So walk us through that experience of starting that fund.
So I will say that I had a lot of help. And when I say I had a lot of help, it's on a LinkedIn, I worked at a company, Gray Financial Group, and we had so the main line of business initially was investment consulting, and then we had some asset management, and so that's where I was co-CEO, and so co-CEO there, and I was charged with running the asset management side of the business after having spent some time on the consulting side as director of research, and then chief administrative officer and some other titles. So I spent about 10 years at Gray and moving through the ranks there. So the small cap value product was actually birthed or born at Gray Financial. And by me being over asset management, I was a part of the decision making for the portfolio manager that we had at the time, as well as the team. And so a decision was made that I would break that off and start my own shop. And the initial intention was to have it be a woman run firm. And so it did start as that. Not a lot of people know that, but it did start as that under a different name. And the woman PM that was working with me, we decided to part ways. But shortly after that, I started Morningside Asset Management and again had the team that I'd had at Gray.
With that mission in mind, like how was the journey though, right? I mean, was it difficult? What was some of your obstacle that you faced, or was it even the way that you imagined? Because as an entrepreneur, I mean, there's a lot of pivotal moments that you have to make, right? So walk me through that experience. Was it like you expected?
So I always like to think that things are going to be tough,
Mhm.
right? If it was easy, everybody would do it. So I didn't expect it to be easy. And I was used to some challenges as being, as it's called, a double minority. But that just proved to be a very hard challenge, right? People may say other things, but to think that a Black woman was running this firm, I think sometimes was just hard, a hard pill for some to swallow. So I, going back to being strategic, I had a plan. And if we didn't reach certain hurdles by a certain time, I'm not foolish or naive. If we didn't reach those hurdles, I was going to have to think of alternative plans. And so, what the hardest part was in the business, it's, you want to be registered with the SEC. And we started off registered with the SEC. That's wonderful. But you need to get to a certain asset level within a certain period of time. And that asset level was 100 million. And I believe at our height, we made it very close to 70 million or so. But the argument from allocators was always, oh, Yolanda, as soon as you get to 100 million, come see me. We'll consider giving you money. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to get to 100 million. I mean, I know market appreciation can be a wonderful thing, but we're not going to get there if we don't have people to allocate assets. And it was just that level of discomfort that some had. And I would remind prospects all the time, your money is custody at a bank. I can, we can't do anything with the money, because it was just hard to accept, if you will, that we were not going to continue to grow, because people didn't want to allocate money to us until we hit this quote unquote hurdle of 100 million. So that was the toughest part.
That's crazy because even when I first started in the industry, whenever you hear 100 million, you're like, oh man, that's a lot of money. And then some firm will look at it, nah, that's like, you're too small. Too small.
You are absolutely,
Too
absolutely.
small. So with you being a past founder of a firm and you working, even now you're president of Focus Financial, even though I know we haven't really touched on that yet, but
One of my former competitors, friendly
so
competitors, though.
so how did you get into Focus? I'm curious.
Sure. So again, we talk about relationships. So Focus is a firm that I have known since their inception, and well, close to their inception. I think about 2006, 2007. One of my colleagues at Focus had worked at some other firms that I knew about, just being in the asset management industry. And then when he got to Focus, I was still a part of the Gray Financial Group, but I was the chief administrative officer of United Investment Managers. And there we were many that listen to this will know, but we were a manager of managers. So we hired managers, and, they actually managed the money for the underlying client that we had. And my colleague came in to me, basically, my now colleague came into me pitching Focus. And with my role as director of research or chief administrative officer, I was the person to come in. So I knew Focus very well. And like I said, in this business, you have to know your competitors, or your peers, as I like to lovingly call them sometimes. And so you know them. And I thought they were a solid firm. So once my firm that I started didn't get to that hurdle or that level that I had internally made for us, I then, looked around or shopped around to see if there were places that we could merge with or that I could sell with. And I went knocking. Focus was one of the doors I knocked on. And again, we had a relationship. So they weren't interested in bringing on the product that I had at Morningside because it didn't make sense for them. But once I was no longer with Morningside, they were very eager to have me come work with them.
That's awesome. So, you started a firm essentially running a product, and, now you're president of this other financial firm. I'm sure that there are some skill set that you acquired along the way. So, the question is, what are the skill set that made you so valuable, and how were you able to develop them?
Yeah, I always think long and hard about that. And I know people always have these wonderful answers. And for me, I think I just go back to basics. I'm in a few organizations. I'm treasurer of a pretty large organization. They continue to want me to do certain things. And our president said to me, she said, you really have to do this again because you're just so organized.
Hmm.
You just have things together and it just flows, and you just give these reports and everybody just listens.
Hmm.
So I like to think that that organization, I don't think sometimes that the people in my house always appreciate it because I just like things to be a certain way. I am very structured. I think even back to the daycare, knowing that those children needed structure, it always made our days better, right? When I had, command of those 8 little people that were under the age of 3. And so I think it's the structure, it's the organization. I am very client centered. And again, what that means for me is the client needs to be taken care of and happy. I am a service oriented person. So I know when I get good service and how it feels. And so I make sure that that is how each and every one of our clients feels. And so for that to happen, all the people on the bus, all of our team players, we have to do certain things. And because I've been around long enough, I just think I know how to get that done. And to just be real transparent and upfront with people, I don't sugarcoat things. I Sometimes my spouse says that I'm mean. I don't think that people say that in the work environment. Maybe I bring that part of it home. But I know how I want to be treated. It goes back to that, treat do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That has stuck with me from the third grade. And, my third grade teacher gets all the credit and being the best of the best, right? And that's what I expect. That's what I deliver. And I think I've just been learning that for a very long time. And I'll, give credit to Miss Conley going back to my home daycare.
It's funny how things in your life always come back in 360. So
Hmm.
that's amazing. I want to make a quick tour, right? So you've accomplished all this, and then you decided to go back to school and get a master in public health. I haven't forgot about that. That's one of the things that's just I haven't quite been able to put that piece together. I really want to ask you
It's
why. What
an
was it?
outlier.
Why?
So it's simple. And I have a mentor on the public health side, and she's I won't say one of the few, but even in writing my letter to go after my master's of public health, I lost my mother some 17 years ago to cancer. Um, and my dad and I and others were her primary caretakers. And I even before that, I started going on this whole, health journey, right? Before it was kind of in vogue and stopped eating meat and doing these things. And so then when my mother became sick, and that's like 20 years ago, I really took this, personally and said, let me figure out all these preventive things that can happen and that we can do. And I just really became this health crusader, if you will. The term I like to use now, everybody's using it, is health coach. But I've been studying prevention for many things for on and off for the last 20 years, just personally. There's not a week that I'm not on 3 or 4 webinars about, integrative medicine, alternative medicine, which I don't like the name alternative, but I'm always doing something as it relates to that. And so a mentor of mine said, you can go ahead and formalize this with an education. And I said, what? But I like school. I really thought that I was going to get my PhD in business. I was a part of the PhD project, which helps students of color to get their PhD. My nephew is a professor, and he likes to say that because of the things that I did, he went to U of I. So my nephew, who I used to say was a baby, who I can't say anymore, but he's a professor at Berkeley. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. But it's like, what are you passionate about? And it was about health and prevention and the disparities of health that really, really impact our people. And because I'm a unofficial health coach to so many family members, they all call me. I have no medical degree. I always say that. but because I coach a lot of people and I want us to have the best quality in our years that we can have, I decided to go ahead and to get a degree. So when I'm talking about it, and eventually I will talk to young people in schools, because I'm very concerned about what's not being dealt with in schools as it relates to health. And it's all about education. So if you know better, you can do better. And if I can help you get those resources to do better, to eating your apples and all these different things, there's just a plethora of information. But that's how I got there. So it's my passion that I deal with all the time. And so now when I go and I coach, or somebody wants, some information, at least they can say, oh, at least she probably knows what she's talking
That's awesome. And the thing about it is that your why, right? You know your why. I think
about.
that a lot of people, when they pursue anything, right, they just pursuing it just because somebody else has it. Right? Or it looks
Right.
good, or it probably is
No,
going to look good in their resume with the hopes of, getting this extra increase in salary. But yours was
not at all.
your why. It's,
Yeah.
I think that is the reason that has allowed you to prepare you to be to where you are to actually be completed, right? Even I joke around with my wife, and she asked me, but my wife is a nurse practitioner,
Okay.
and even when her and I met her in grad school, we both went to different schools, but she
Hmm.
would ask me, why did you take your time and read all these 10,000 pages to get a certification and spend like 4 years? I told her, look, after I spent my first money, I didn't want to lose that money no more.
Absolutely. I totally understand that. Yep.
I mean, and I joke around and I say that, but I mean, obviously it's a passion thing. But I was like, man, when you spend $1,000 as a college student, you see that money goes away, you want to make sure you get that money.
Yes. Every penny.
But
Yes.
a lot of time I like to ask my guests what are their passion are, and you touch on yours a little bit. But I think, just going back to some of the things that you share with me, community has always been something that's been around for you, right? And what other things outside of healthcare or fitness or coaching that you're passionate about?
So, I mean, as I like their pillars, right? If we don't have our health, it's not a whole lot that you can do. And so for me, it starts there. And so if we take care of ourselves, there are a lot of people walking around or not walking around that aren't feeling good, right? That aren't able to live their best lives because they aren't in the best health. And so for me, it starts there. I mean, I love nature, right? And I am very simple. When I have spare time, which isn't often, I am in my backyard grounding, right? That's a part of health, though, a practice. I am barefoot, touching the ground or in the grass. I live in an area that's surrounded by trees. It calms and centers. And in this asset management industry, right, that's needed because it can be a stressful environment. Um, but health, again, is definitely a passion. The asset management is huge. We hear this wealth management, this whole lovely buzzword, and what is the wealth picture gonna be for yourself, for my children. And I think I'm so proud of your generation and even younger really taking this seriously. So one of the things that I do is I speak to students and to young people all the time about how to be successful with their own money. That education is so needed. This financial literacy is ridiculous that we're having conversations and it's not a part of every elementary curriculum. It's ridiculous that health is not a part of every elementary curriculum. Those things make no sense. As at Focus, one of our products is real estate, right? So all this stuff ties together. Real estate can help with that wealth management picture, or having wealth. So sometimes I like to say I have this pyramid, and it's asset management, it's health is at the top, and then there's real estate. So I am just really passionate about helping young people to figure it out and figure it out earlier, right? I have wonderful people around me, and some don't, but I am just here to help as many as possible, and with the focus of that being on black women.
That's awesome. Do you currently have any project that you're working on towards that?
So my colleague that I work with at Focus is really a wonderful person, and we have been talking for years about a program to promote and encourage girls and women to become extraordinary investors, investment managers, analysts, anything in the space. And very recently, we actually started a nonprofit called the Tubman Program, yes, named after wonderful Harriet Tubman. And this program is, it is still going through various iterations, but the organization, I'm the president and executive director. We're based out of California, but there's going to be a whole lot more to come. Again, some of the students that I have mentored that have gone on that are doing great things in the asset management space. We want to make sure that girls and women have mentors and the resources all the way from, elementary throughout their career. So many times you can have a mentor or a sponsor to kind of get you to this job. What I've learned with some of my mentees is they need support all the way through. I've definitely been a therapist on the call because it's tough out there, and many girls and women go into these larger firms, which I applaud, but they need somebody to help and to be there with them for every step of the way. So the Tubman program, we're really excited about it. And again, our mission is promoting and encouraging women and young girls to be extraordinary investors, asset managers, analysts, directors of research. So you'll hear more about it in the time to come, the days ahead.
Definitely keep us posted, and we would love to, share it with the audience. To those who may be interested in how to be able to get in touch with you. That is awesome, because even for myself, I think that the biggest return that you could get on your time is to find somebody else that actually done it, and just ask them question. Hey, how did you do it? So to hear what you're doing or what you're working on, it's an awesome venture to pursue. I like to wrap it up. I usually ask my guests a question, and with all that being said, how do you want to be remembered as when it's all over?
Wow. Um, I think really simply, I want to be remembered as somebody that was willing to pull the next person up. So many times, I think people don't help people because they feel that it's taken something away from themselves. I've been very fortunate to be helped, but really one of the most important things to me is to be a Black woman that helps other Black women, because I have had a wonderful, wonderful time in this industry, but I was mostly helped by men. And I just think every mentee that I've had the pleasure of being a part of their lives, I just smile so big because it's just an amazing thing, right? To see somebody that you can help. So if I can help one young woman of color succeed in this industry, that's good enough.
That's awesome. Well, Yolanda, thank you for taking the time to join us today in a podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest. Hopefully, we could have you on later on in the future, especially when things really start to ramp up for you with the program.
Thank,
Overall, thank you.
thank you. This has been wonderful, and I just look forward to seeing the future podcast that you'll do. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Barriers of Black Investors. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower and uplift our community. Help us spread the word by sharing our podcast. Thank you for listening.